Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Mage, Errant, Book 7, The Last Echo of the Lord of Bells, Chapters 72, 73, 74, and 75. In these chapters, well, there's a whole lot more that happens, don't get me wrong, but we gotta talk about what happens to Alustin here. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. Y'all, this was really kind of gratifying. I'm going to be honest and say that I kind of thought we were finding an alternative to Alustin dying. Like, you guys know, last week I was like, I don't know. Is that what's... I feel like I feel like we had reached a point where we understood, like, what Alustin had intended to do versus what it looked like he was actually going to do. We had spent enough time with him, and he was given enough grace in some ways that it seemed as if the author was like sort of wanting to soften him in our eyes a little bit to make us less angry with him. And it was working a little, you know, like not entirely, but a little. And when this chapter started, New Echoes, I just realized I didn't read the titles of the chapters this time around. So 72 is New Echoes, then Fire Mage, Wallbreaker's Legacy, and Blueprints for the Future. This, like, dealing with him is handled really, really well. Kanderon spent nearly an hour interrogating Alustin privately before beginning his trial. And I'm extremely interested in what happened privately. Like, what do you think? You know? Do we ever get to find out? I'm assuming no. And it doesn't really matter. But I really kind of appreciated the way that this is structured. Because what we get is Kanderon telling Alustin, here's what you did. And Alustin saying yes to all of it. There's no attempt at an excuse, a denial, none of that. He is just like, yep, I did that shit. And it's a combo for me of how much he just accepts what she's saying and is like fessing up to it, that I like and appreciate. But also, in another respect, something that I really enjoy about this is that it reminds me, the reader, the extent of everything that Alustin had done. Because, you know, the softening effect was real, and I was finding myself sort of, what's the word? Hand-waving isn't correct, because hand-waving implies that I know of a thing and I'm just ignoring it. What I mean is, a lot of the terrible things he did had sort of fallen into the mists of history for me a little bit. And I needed a refresh and a reminder that, like, no. This dude is fucked up. He did truly heinous, despicable things. Don't forget XYZ and ABC. And I'll be totally real. I had forgotten a little bit. So she starts off with just like the big strokes. You betrayed me, murdered your friends and allies, risked the lives of your own students, made refugees out of millions of people, almost destroyed a continent, stole weapons that should never have been touched. And he's like, yes. And then she says, you revealed the existence of Jysena Deepholm to the world, and she'll have great powers and nations harassing her for decades to come. And I was like, oh, right. That, like, when he revealed this option for getting through, you know, the security for using the tunnels, it, you know, guys, like, this is how my brain just can be so short-sighted. He reveals this, like, really intense secret, and then I guess just because he thinks, well, the world is going to end, I'm not going to have to worry about the long-term consequences of this, because she and nobody else that I have told this secret will even still be alive, so it doesn't matter. But I should have, like, if I'm thinking he is not going to succeed, if I am thinking, well, that's a nice thought and everything, but that's not how it's actually going to work, you're going to fail, which I did as a reader, I should have then asked the next question, which is, so what happens to everybody who knows about this now? This is a being that just wanted to fucking, like, be. That's all she wanted. And I know that there are bigger, badder fish to fry. Millions of refugees, for example. The dead. But there is something about this being getting pulled into it and now being a target in this very specific way that fucking got me a little bit, in a way that you would think the lives of millions would have and didn't. And I think it's simply because it's an easier thing to zero in on and sort of like empathize with. When you're looking at a huge disaster and hundreds and thousands and millions of lives either lost or affected, it's just too much to comprehend exactly and really like keep in a perspective that feels like human. It's beyond that, you know? But with somebody that's like a being, even though we haven't gotten to know them necessarily, but we understand that their existence was a trusted secret, that Kanderon told somebody that she believed would be responsible with this information. And the way he just so cavalierly, because he was so sure he was going to win. And that's it's a really good sort of microcosm of the way he behaved about everything. Nothing mattered to him because he thought he was just going to be able to light a match and set everything ablaze and walk away. And now all these consequences are coming home to roost after all. You committed numerous other crimes against Skyhold, myself, and civilization, enough that to list them would take hours. Do you have any defenses to lay forth for your actions? No. Would anyone speak in Alustin's defense? And for a moment, Hugh feels like he wants to say something. But Alustin seems to sense this. And it says, I forfeit my opportunity for others to speak in my defense, Alustin said. And Hugh realized that his former teacher was staring straight at him, an almost kind look on his face. And I just really loved that. The fact that Hugh considered saying anything at all after everything Alustin has done just really speaks to the kind of person that Hugh is. The kind of person that I wish I was more like, but I don't know that I will ever be. I am a vengeful person in a way, you know? And I don't know. It can be sort of weird though. Like, I'll know somebody has done something terrible, but then I see them like suffering and I still feel bad for them. So who knows? But finally, she says, do you have any final words? And there's a little interaction here. Anything else would be pointless echoes from a city long dead. And she says, the echoes of Alustin Haber will ring on for many years yet, for better or worse. And he says, I suppose that's all you can really hope for in the end. And she says, no. There are plenty of better things to hope for. And I really appreciated that, like, because well, you know, that's all you can hope for. It's very pithy, but it's bullshit. Which, frankly, a lot of pithy things are, kind of, if you, like, pick them apart in any way. So I just really liked her kind of calling him out and being like, I know you think you're being cute, but you aren't just going to, like, sidestep this by being almost, like, cavalier about what you've done. And say, oh, well, my legacy is living on, so I suppose I've accomplished something. No, you haven't, though. She says, I would have gladly traded my own such role in history for my mate and child back centuries ago. And he says, you know, that's a trade I'd make gladly myself. Hugh couldn't help but wonder the same, whether he'd trade everything he'd done, everyone he'd met, for the chance to have his parents and little sister back from the fire that had claimed them. Whether he would have given up his chance to learn powerful magics, to travel the world, to visit other worlds, to bring them back, to give up his new family, to save his old. Hugh didn't know, but knew it would be a question he would worry at for a long, long time, even though it was an impossible trade. And it's the sort of thing that I feel reading it, I'm kind of like, it doesn't matter. Like, just let that go. But I know what it's like to kind of have this thought in your head, and it just comes up every now and then to ask whether or not you would be willing to sacrifice certain things. And also I just want to mention too, like, I always forget that he had a sister. I think this has been mentioned a few times, and I don't know why, but it's like never sunk in. And I don't recall just how young Hugh was when his family died. So I don't know if he had a particular, like, relationship with her yet, or if she was too little for that to have happened. But I am really curious about his memories of his family, because they seem fairly sparse, you know? So finally she says, is there anything else? And he says, yes, actually, one final glass of wine. And she's like, I don't have, and I brought my own. Alustin began to pull things out of his storage tattoo. A light wireframe iron table with 2 matching chairs, a tastefully embroidered tablecloth, 2 crystal wine glasses, a packet of battered letters that had been torn apart and repaired with magic more than once, and a single bottle of wine. And it turns out this is the last bottle from his homeland. And he pours it and is just savoring the moment. And Eden Slane just is saying, get on with it already. Which I completely understand, of course, because to a point, you can't help but see this as Alustin just being fucking cheeky again. Like, prolonging everything, needing to be the center of attention. I get that. And that has been who he is. So I'm not even begrudging seeing it this way. But that's not actually, in my mind, all that's happening here. This is genuinely him saying goodbye to the world and his home and life And yeah, I guess he deserves 15 minutes to sit and have a glass of wine for a moment if they're asking if he has last requests. You know, like, I'm not going to begrudge him this at all. And, you know, the fact that he pours for both seats, which I'm assuming was for Valia, like in honor of her, it just really, it was really sad. It bummed me out. Like, I like it though as a means of emptying the air of that energy that can come when people are just hungry to see vengeance or bloodshed. Do you know what I'm saying? There's oh, sorry, Dan is in the chat, says, this got me. Despite everything that Alustin did, that last bottle of wine drives home how tragic the fall. Yeah, the fall of Helicote was. Agree. And losing Valia and feeling like, I feel like losing her was more than anything a consequence that Alustin truly felt at his core. I don't think anything else really seemed to hit the same way as that. And the fact that she, of course, died protecting him, you know, like, just all of it. But, there's an episode, an old episode of Real Housewives of, or not Real Housewives, Desperate Housewives. And it's one that I, at the time, didn't really understand. But that as I get older, looking back, I'm like, oh, actually, that was genius. And there's a character whose husband and her work at the same firm. And I think it's an advertising firm. And they have this boss that is a real frat boy type who gets along great with her husband. But they keep pranking each other and daring each other in this very juvenile way that is starting to get out of hand, especially because he's their superior. So her husband is put in a position where he kind of has to do things when the other doesn't really have to. And it's all being fed into by this eagerness on the rest of the office to see them do these absurd things because they're bored. They just have these office jobs and there's this wild shit happening and everybody's like fucking chanting and egging them on. And finally, his wife, who is sick of it, she creates a consequence if one of them loses a game of eating an entire packet of raw bacon. And she takes the challenge on. And she loses. And does it on purpose. Because she knows if she wins, the boss is just not going to do it. So what she has created with this challenge is a consequence that sounds really gross and horrible, but in practice, watching her slowly eat her way through this raw bacon is just so disgusting and so prolonged, and it's so clear how like sick it's making her that it just takes all the fun out of it. And it kind of puts a damper on the pranks and everything in general. And I didn't understand at the time why this worked so well, but now I get the diffusing of that frenetic sort of energy is very, very effective. And that's kind of the thing. You've got to find a way to break through this, you know what I mean? And not to say that that's exactly what Alustin's intent is here. I don't think that's actually the point he's making. But I really like the idea of saying that, like, okay, yeah, sure, we're going to execute this person. But first, you're going to have to sit and watch them eat an entire pizza and have a pitcher of beer. Because you are in the impulsive swell of emotion from the crowd, baying for blood and justice, you're going to want a different thing than you want after sitting watching 45 minutes of a person just eating a meal. And I wouldn't hate this as a way of like getting everybody to stop and ask themselves, is this what you really want to do? You know what I mean? So he finally sets down his glass, and I'm just going to say, it's not empty. He doesn't finish all of his wine. It's a quarter full. And the other, I am assuming, glass is still full completely. I don't think he touches it, and I don't think he puts that stuff away. But he just says, I'm ready. Alustin raised his glass to Hugh and the others as though sharing a toast, and then brought it to his lips one last time. And then the shield filled with starfire, and Hugh was forced to look away. Edenslain grunted, then walked away. And there's something about Edenslain's reaction that feels to me like that's kind of what happened. I feel like, I'm not to say that he was necessarily going to be dancing a jig on his grave or anything like that, but you know what I'm saying? Godric sat on the ground, staring heavily at the fading starfire, at the steaming ground and melted iron table and chairs, his face conflicted. Talia started crying quietly, and Hugh wrapped his arms around her. Sabé turned away, but didn't walk off like Edenslain, and Hugh just stared at Kanderon, trying to understand what he saw in her face. And I bet it's a lot of different things. You know, this is somebody who attempted to murder her, who was her right hand and betrayed her. And not only did he betray her for his own personal vendetta, but he betrayed her on the word of someone from the domain that he was going after, which is hilarious and embarrassing. All of that. But also, she still cares about Alustin. He was brilliant. He was funny. And for a while, he seemed trustworthy. It seemed, you know what I mean? Like, and then she has to be the one to execute him after everything has happened. I mean, that sucks. This sucked. I think there was no real alternative other than this kind of execution. You guys know when I was even trying to think, like, if we keep him alive, then what do we do with him? And I just couldn't think of anything that was adequate. You know, I can't see him running off into the sunset, especially when there's not even Valia to go with him. I didn't see him being imprisoned because, like, a guy like him, I just don't see him staying anywhere he doesn't want to be. And even if he were imprisoned and he didn't get out, there's a lot of people who'd be trying to get to him. You know, like, a lot of people are going to be holding a real fucking grudge. And there comes a point when, if you are going to be in charge, you have to take into account what people want. And I don't see anybody other than the students who were closest to him really wanting Alustin to live. You know? So then we go to 73, Fire Mage, and we are hanging out with the Castus clan. There's all of these jokes about the like losing the arm, and you guys, if I hadn't drawn the parallels with the Weasley family before, I would be this time, because it's really giving the losing of an ear that I think it's Fred lost, like, and the way that they made all of those, like, holy jokes. But yeah, this is a pretty fun little bit with him. Just, I knew he was going to be, like, excited about it. We could try to construct you an elemental arm, maybe an ice elemental. Maybe, Leon said cheerfully. Want to see something neat, though? He summoned a ball of flame over his left palm, and his tattoos began to ignite, including the ones around his missing limb. Talia could clearly make out the outlines of his arm, fingers included, from the hovering blue spell forms in midair. Leon started moving it around, waving it at them, then grabbing the ball of fire from his right hand. Weird, Roland said. Seriously weird, Hela agreed. I've heard of that happening, but never actually seen it before, Rafe said. That offers some fascinating possibilities. And I think this is a really fun idea because you know that there have been a lot of like studies and things about phantom limb and losing a limb but still feeling it there. And the idea that they have ether bodies in this universe and that they are something that, like, in the right state, you can see, even though it's extremely rare. I'm wondering if this is at all related to having a sort of other body that's made of magic because of the way their mana works. You know what I mean? I don't know if it's, like, even at all related, but I just think that's a really fun idea. And then they have some talk about Talia becoming a great power. And at first, Tristan is like, I'm sure she'll use her power responsibly. And everybody looks at him and is like, bruh. And then he starts cracking up and he's like, yeah, no. And they all admit that she's going to be insufferable, as each of them admits they also would be. And same, you know. Talia's family time was eventually broken up by the report that one of their fire elementals had survived, was apparently stable, and was grazing on the Seekin Elder's greenery. Talia wandered off in the direction of Sabe, since Hugh was stuck in the Great Power meeting, Kanderon not wanting to let him out of her sight right now. It was easy enough to track Sabe by their warlock pact, but Talia found her course interrupted by spotting someone unexpected. Eudaxus, Indris's high priest. And I love that she's like, I'm really glad he has a shirt on. I just can't. I could not have, you know. I like to imagine her like, not necessarily out of attraction, but just like unable to stop glancing at his nipples repeatedly in the midst of the conversation because it's just sort of like so weird, you know. So she sits down and starts off with, I'm sorry about Indris. Shouldn't you be at the Great Power meeting? And he says, I mean, I got invited to it, but I don't see why I would go. She's not alive anymore. And Therastel is probably just gonna get got by some other great power now. Like, it's a sitting duck. Probably quite a few are going to duel over it and wreck a good chunk of the city, and none of them are gonna want the former queen's high priest around. And Talia is like, well, you could ask for help. You don't have to just do this by yourself. And Eudaxus, I hadn't expected this, made a joke about how Kanderon and Alinea would, like, take the opportunity to claim the throne. And I was like, oh, is he still, like, operating under the assumption that's what they would want? Like, I'm so beyond that now that it didn't occur to me anybody else was still in that state of mind. And thankfully, Talia literally laughs at him and it's just like, no, they don't want that. Kanderon hates empires, and the Kandas family has never wanted, like, other territory. They have other ambitions, but Alinea just really wants stability and to be able to keep her family intact. So, yeah, spreading out like that isn't a goal of hers at all. And he's like, all right, well, that's fair. But, you know, we have these huge storms that she was in charge of guarding us from, and I don't know who else is going to be able to manage this. And she mentions Hugh, and I was like, oh yeah, I mean, he did help that, like, saved the city that one time. And after all the growth that he has gone through, And with some time to actually like establish some real wards in place that he has tested and experimented with, like, I bet he could really get something going. And he's like, well, yeah, but there's still a lot of other problems. Defending from great powers. I'm powerful, but I'm not a match for great powers. And it's just a label in the end. I'm not, like, up against some of the other monsters out there. I couldn't do shit. Theristel is one of the choicest jewels on the continent. It's grown fat on trade over my queen's rule. Her fortune alone would be enough to bring great powers calling. Who is there to stand up to Dorsus Hine when he comes for the city's gold? What about him? Talia asked, and pointed at the gargantuan, chain-studded hydra at the edge of the meeting. Raymol? Why not? He seems trustworthy enough. Served to guard Skyhold in Kanderon's absence. I'm sure you could convince him if you tried. Plus, you've got to find Thaddeus a new warlock partner. You could use him as a bargaining chip, maybe. Very mercenary of you. Well, I'd still expect you to find him a good partner. Keep to the spirit and letter of Indris's bargain with you and all. But there's flexibility in there. Get a bidding war started with Alinea and Kanderon, maybe a few others. I have a suspicion that warlocks are going to start being much more in demand in the near future. Eudaxus snorted. Indris had more than a single warlock, so that might be better advice than you know. And I just really like that the way that she approaches this and the fact that Eudaxus is open to her suggestions and not dismissive or kind of biting her head off because she's persistent in suggesting stuff. Sometimes when people are like, well, but there's other issues to consider, it's not that they want you to continue to suggest things. It's that they're signaling that they don't want to have this conversation. And I really, the fact that he is entertaining Talia here just goes to show, considering how young she is, how impressive she is. And the fact that he is taking her seriously is really quite remarkable. So it's not going to be easy for me. Indris is more than a mere ruler to me. She was genuinely worth serving. She gave my life purpose. So honor her by protecting the city. Go to that meeting, call in whatever favors, and make whatever promises you need to. Thank you, my young friend. I will do my best for Indris. And he is about to leave before he's like, ooh, it's kind of impolite for me to ask, not to take all this advice and start to leave and not even ask her what's going on with you. And before he leaves, he says, what about you being a great power now? And she's like, I don't have any plans other than helping my friends become great powers. And he's like, do you think they'll do that? And she's like, yeah. What? Of course they will. I love how completely lacking in doubt she is, to the point that anyone expressing that she might have doubts, she's just like, oh, no, we don't do that here. We don't doubt friends. That's not how it goes at all. And he says, perhaps I'll approach you about being defenders of Theristel in the future. And she's like, don't think we're going to give you a discount. I really like that. She'd earned the title of great power for her skill and magical might, not just her skeleton, but it would always be there, lurking inside her. She wasn't sure she'd ever feel comfortable drinking again, risking that loss of impulse control, which I thought was really interesting. The idea of this lurking thing that you feel might be outside of your control, because it's like her skeleton is not sentient or anything. It doesn't feel to me the same way that other storylines would. So the concept of her suddenly just sort of losing it never even occurred to me. And while I understand her feeling this way, I gotta be honest, I just don't see it as a genuine thing to worry about. She is just so empathetic when it comes right down to it, that something on the scale of her own skeleton just unleashing that, I don't see her ever reaching a frame of mind where she'd be willing to do it. And maybe that's me being silly, but so she goes and crashes that meeting. We then go over to Godric, and he's wandering through the encampment, and we get a little bit of an update on what's going on with various people. Even now, the whole thing seemed absurd to Godric. They'd all been enemies of the Dominion, but had fought each other as much as Havath out of nothing but lies. Alustin's lies, Sabé's lies at Kanderon's behest, it all seemed so pointless, so flimsy now, which is truly, that's one of the things that I find the most frightening about wars in general, is how much destruction can be wreaked from a few words that may or may not even be true. The way that people can be manipulated. And it's just really sobering. Godric wandered past the Sarnassian Griffin Rider survivors who were struggling to keep their mounts from picking fights with Indris's children. It wouldn't have gone well for them, since most of the dragons of Indris blood that had joined them today had survived. 20 or so griffins were a poor match for over 100 dragons. He wondered whether his grandparents had told his father stories of the Griffin Riders before they died as innocent bystanders in a Lothal palace coup, before his father was press-ganged into service at sea. He wondered what his father's life would have been like without the great powers, without the constant coups that had devastated Lothal for decades before Ampioc's ascension. And, I don't feel like I quite knew the history of, like, how all of Arthur's service came to be. And thus, because I wasn't quite, like, and again, I don't want to say that I forgot, because that implies that we were told this, and I'm not sure how much of this we knew and how much of it I did actually forget. But the concept of his father being press-ganged and the way that this coup is described, and having been, their deaths were like just side effects of great powers. I don't think I fully appreciated Godric's potential investment in Sabé's plan to bring the great powers down a few notches and eventually hopefully eliminate them, but that's her main plan. And I am a little bit curious about, like, the rest of that story, just because I like Arthur so much and I like Godric so much that I just want a little bit more, like, let's get a prequel. I'm just angling for a prequel. That's all I'm saying. Well, a little preaky preak. So he finally gets to the spot where all the Gorgons are, and Karna Scythe is in the center, and I'm laughing so hard. Karna Scythe is making this huge statue of herself. And I love that it's like the whole labyrinth is continuing to decay. What is the point of doing this? But I really understand the motivation to do something like this explicitly, because it's decaying. Like, you just want to have a little bit of fun. You don't necessarily actually want an immortal statue of yourself, in a particular spot, but it's something to, like, let off steam and just sort of floss for a second, I don't know. I like it. Dan says, yeah, Archer's story would be fascinating, right? I don't know. I feel like I would really, really be into reading that. Godric stood at the edge of the camp's windshield, just watching the storm and the surreal vertical jungle for a time, and wondered what a world without the great powers would look like, whether it was even possible when there were beings who could do things like this. And, I love this. He walks over to Shimmering Cardivan and Eden Slane, and he asks Cardivan hey, I've always been wondering what it is that your cool-ass trident does, because you carry it, but I never see you use it. And Cardigan says, oh, it doesn't do anything. I just really think it's cute. I like it. It's like a nice accessory. So, and I was just like, look, as much as I fully appreciate, don't think I don't, carrying a weapon just because you like the way that it looks. I just can't imagine not choosing to enchant it in some way to make it practical. You know what I'm saying? Like, I like this as a joke, but I don't think so. I just think Shimmering Cardigan would make it be something. I don't know. But I just, you guys, the idea of like, there's an app out there called Habitica. And for those of you who like games and who have trouble with to-do lists, you may want to check Habitica out. I've talked about it before, but it's an app where you gamify your to-do lists and you get rewards of different pieces of clothing and different mounts and different foods to feed your mount to make it grow. And it's all done in like, I don't know if you would call it 8-bit. I'm not sure if it technically is, but it's done in like those sprites, that are that kind of old school artwork. And they have 2 settings for what you are equipping for your costume. And one of them is the settings for the actual shit that does stuff. Like this sword means that you get 10 extra points every time you check off something on your to-do list. And then they have the setting where it's literally just costume and you can choose anything, but they don't function the way that they like, with their little effects. And I just always really enjoy that they have those 2 completely distinct ways of what's the word I want? I'm for lack of a better way of putting it, just like dressing your little character. Because yeah, I want the stuff that's the most strong. I want to be smart about what this being can do, but I don't want them to wear this like mismatched outfit. Thank you, but no. They gotta look good. Come on. It's not my fault that the dope-ass sea serpent costume with the headdress does something for mages and I'm a warrior class. I want to wear it. I'll find other tools to do that job, but let me be cute, please. So, yes, very relatable. This is something that I think, though, a lot of people misunderstand about me and the fact that I am really extra is that I am also deeply practical. So I don't do just cute and like set aside the functionality of a thing. I have to make sure that something actually works and serves a purpose a lot of the time, which means that I will like be really picky about what I want for decor or for kitchenware or for anything for my office, because it needs to strike that exact sweet spot of being really, really pretty, but also being one of the better options out there in terms of quality for getting done what I need done. So finally, Godric, agrees with Ed and Slane to talk about that wild math style of magic at some point, starts to leave, and then Eden calls him back and says, Skyhold has already started harvesting the Iron Mountain your father left behind, but I ordered a commission to be made from some of the iron. Godric felt as though he should be mad about the Iron Mountain, given that it was the closest thing his father had to a tomb, but he only felt tired. I've ordered the construction of a great stone statue in the mountain's location once the mountain's gone. A statue of your father to stand guard over Skyhold's harbor, 200 feet tall, carrying an iron hammer sized to match. Godric couldn't help but laugh. His Da had never sought that sort of fame, would have been happy with a quiet life as a family man, but it seemed he was going to have a place in history regardless. And it's like, so we're trying to decide whether he should be wearing his famous armor, and Godric is like, nah, don't put his armor on him, and make sure that he's got a big old grin on his face, which I did appreciate that being mentioned, because when I imagined what the statue looked like, it was definitely Arthur smiling in an almost mischievous sort of way, ear to ear, but just like, you know, an expression of somebody who's not victorious in battle so much as like just won a football game, something like that. And that's just the energy that I have for him in my mind. And I was glad that it seems like I know exactly what Arthur's place in his son's mind is as well, that I'm thinking of him the exact same way. So I love this. We get a little bit of the secret clan thing, because Godric comes up to Tristan, who Rana says something to him, and Tristan leaves. And when he's like, what were you talking about? She says, well, it wasn't you, first of all, but I was making him a job offer. He's one of the least egotistical of his siblings, the one that's best at working with others. And she's like, and when she says this, Godric says, what? No, he's not. And she says, sure, he's got a flair for the dramatic, but you've met his siblings, right? Do you know how much work Kanderon's put into Clan Castus over the years to make sure they don't blow themselves up or declare war on the rest of the continent or something? And I really was expecting that something with this secret clan deal was going to be outed by the end of this book, but it looks like it won't be. It looks like this is just like a method of controlling Clan Castus that's going to continue on as a secret little manipulation. And I'm not really that mad about it, but I would have enjoyed everybody finding out that, like, oh, you think you're a part of this cool secret thing, but you're not. You're all in a giant fake secret thing. An idea popped into Godric's mind. He knew what he wanted to do with his dad's armor and precisely who he wanted to teach it to. Everyone. He was going to make sure his Da wasn't just remembered as a warrior or a great power, but as a brilliant magical researcher as well. And I really like this idea, and we'll get a little bit more of this in the next chapter, because Blueprints for the Future is mostly Sabe's POV. First, she goes over to see her grandmother, who is pretty much fine. I wasn't really sure how it was going to be with Alinea once we caught back up with her, if she was going to be more wounded than it seemed like. It seems not. But the conversation, she first wants to know, because her grandmother, despite her injuries and all of this, was still, of course, part of the giant meeting that everybody had. And her grandmother says lots of pointless posturing and sorting out a hierarchy. And Sabe starts to say wouldn't, and her grandmother interrupts and is like, yeah, Kanderon is on top. Yes, we all know that. Even if Heliothrax hadn't been badly wounded, Kanderon would have crushed her. So, definitely number one, but she's going to need allies. Like, just because you're a great power and exponentially more badass than others does not mean that you can, like, be in multiple places at once, or no man is an island, I guess, is really what it comes down to. Those lickspittles are jockeying pathetically for her attention. Beings capable of leveling cities, behaving like petty nobles. That's the problem with a hierarchy of personal power. you end up desperately enforcing it even if you're not on top, just out of hopes you either get to the top or gain the favor of those above you. You give someone committed to a hierarchy someone to look down on, and they'll accept any number of indignities from above. That's an entire sermon. You know, like, it's really fucking true. And it's always kind of shocking to me when I see this in action, because, you know, I have a line, and it's the sort of thing where I am always surprised at how much further out some people's lines are from me. I'm not trying to say that if there isn't something for me to gain, that I'm not going to do what I can to get it. But I am saying that, like, jockeying for the favor of people above me, and in such a transparent way, is so lacking in dignity. I don't know if I could do it. That just feels really... There's just no dignity there. And I have pride. I do, you know, maybe more than I should. And I have like a sort of personal ethos, I guess you could call it. And I don't know how you live with yourself if you just compromise over and over because you could get something out of somebody if you did it. So anyway, this... Ilenia says, I'm not going to play. That's the only way to win. And, you know, Kanderon owes me. So I'm not worried that she's going to just run off with some other ally into the night. She knows. I feel very comfortable. There was discussion of important matters also. Our seers have gotten a better grasp of the situation to the south. Sika's in full retreat. As nasty and strange as their armies and tactics are, they were overambitious. The Dominion forces to the south wore them down through sheer numbers and spell power. Not to mention the Rust Queen is as close to a perfect matchup against a Seekin Elder as possible. It's going to be months before they get that Elder back into fighting readiness, and they overstretch their capabilities, moving so many Elders at once. And she asks, why was the Seekin Elder even here? And I didn't even ask that question. Ilenia says, I think it was trying to turn Havath City's ruins into a forward base for their expansion. They've just been waiting for a chance to attack Havath again. Which was an interesting concept. So it ends with Kanderon's putting out a declaration with all of us as signatories, including Talia. We are going to officially recognize and support any Havathi provinces that declare themselves independent nations and help them establish great powers to defend themselves, mostly in the form of liches. I feel like that's a good start, you know, like just offer support. There's all these refugees and this whole thing was such a mess. Like, Havath as a dominion has fallen. I'm glad that we're not continuing to hold where a lot of these people come from against them. I don't know how they are going to feel about this, because I'm sure with the dominion having fallen that there are some people who hold these folks responsible for their homeland being decimated. I don't know how many of their family, like it seems like mostly the refugees got out of it without too many casualties. But maybe the fact that there are so many survivors and that they were able to flee takes the sting out of it, and they don't wind up in the situation that Alustin did, where everybody was fucking dead. But I'm running out of time here, so I do have to jump ahead a little bit. Ilenia basically talks with Sabe for a little bit about how she's going to continue to take great powers down. And Ilenia is like, well, I'm looking forward to seeing you flip the table. And then Sabe asks, are you going to miss Indris? And she just keeps dodging the question until she finally admits, yes, I will miss her. Like, she wasn't always a friend or an ally, But she was always there. She was part of things. And sometimes she was a friend. And, and then she ends it with, she died the way she lived, though, being a pain in the ass. And that was really funny, actually. I really, really liked that. So then we get this conversation between Sabe and Kanderon. And this is really fascinating. Sabe has come up with a means of fighting against the concept of personal power. And her plan is to write a book that focuses on the success of collaborative power instead. And I think this is really, really fun. Clan Castus is another communal great power as well. Then you have less permanent arrangements. During our advance in Havath City, I watched Hugh, Godric, and a few other archmages level a fort that a great power would have struggled with by combining their magics. You believe advocating collaborative magics to be a counter to individual great powers, Kanderon said. Sabe nodded. Don't get me wrong, groups of people are capable of evils just as vicious as individuals. But the worst of our problems comes from unrestrained personal power. At the very least, communal great power is less likely to impulsively level a town due to a petty insult. And at best, it might serve as a counter to the current system in a similar way you hope for with your liches. Ultimately, though, our world's problems derive from imbalanced concentrations of power. Spreading it out a bit seems worth a try. She's talking about the redistribution of wealth. This is socialism. I love it. I love it. Just like for the record, I'm sure you all fully anticipated that I would. But that's what this is. It's individuals hoarding wealth are completely collapsing the balance of things. And we need to find ways to function as a group, dare I say a community, dare I say a commune of people with vested interests and similar stakes. Like, what if we were cooperative? What if, Sabe? What an idea. And putting, Archer's spell, his armor into the public domain, for lack of a better way of saying this, is part of this. And she also mentions Eden Slane's magical style. And that makes a lot of sense as well with how mathematical it is. It feels like it was applicable to a lot of different types of magics. And how could that be spread? Hugh's got quite a few ideas for communally operated and powered wards to protect communities from rampaging great powers. And Kanderon says, well, I will caution you that the tools that you create aren't necessarily going to be used for what you plan. That's kind of the deal. And she's like, oh, I know that. And then she says, as Lucan the Sour said, the fundamental divide is between those who want to consolidate power in the hands of one group or another and those who want to distribute and dilute power widely, Kanderon finished. And it turns out she knew Lucan and also that he was a serial arsonist. And Kanderon is like, no, yeah, he did that. And he loved it. He always took credit for it. He bragged about it to me. Do you want some of the letters he wrote me? Because, I have them. I could go find them. And I just love Sabe being like, yes? Oh my God. Lucan touched exactly on the solution. I don't want to give different people power, no matter how well-intentioned they are. I want to spread it and give the great powers reason to fear ordinary people. And I know that's gonna fucking, push some buttons. And Kanderon's like, oh, it will. But anybody whose buttons are pushed are going to have to come and chat with me about it. I'll handle distribution. Don't you worry about that. And that is the end of the chapter. So, yeah, I really like that plan. I feel like that makes a lot of sense. Because you guys know that I wasn't really sure what Sabe was thinking to do. But this makes a lot of sense. And I really like that Beers has built into the magical system of this universe the precedent that group magic works better than individual great magic when they are great powers works. You know, I think that's a really smart, like, approach that he clearly laid the groundwork for from the start. And it also makes a lot of sense that emphasizing that is a short-term solution just for their personal security for a lot of people, but also a long-term solution by creating value. People seeing that that is a real approach rather than sort of the fallback of the less powerful. So, yeah, I'm into it. But I have got to go. I'm over time. So thank you again so much, Dan, for commissioning this. I'll be seeing you guys soon with the last chapters of the book. And until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.